For 15 years, I ran the kitchen at my mother-in-law's restaurant, using a sauce recipe everyone called hers. When she decided to franchise it nationwide, she told a reporter it was her mother's recipe, passed down for generations from a village outside Naples. She never mentioned the fire. She never mentioned that I was the one who rebuilt that recipe from memory, alone in my own kitchen, while she cried into a dish towel because she thought it was gone forever. My husband told me to just let her have the credit. I smiled and said nothing, but I registered that recipe under my own name, years before any of this started. And when the franchise lawyers finally came asking for proof of where it really came from, I was the only person in that family who had any. Let me back up and tell you how we got there. I met Daniel Moretti at a friend's birthday party 11 years ago. He was quiet in a room full of loud people, the kind of guy who refilled everyone's drink before they knew they needed one. When he told me his family owned an Italian restaurant, I pictured something small and forgettable. I didn't picture Rosa's Kitchen, a place with a 40-year history, a line out the door on Friday nights, and a matriarch who ran the front of house like she was commanding a ship in a storm. That matriarch was Linda, Daniel's mother. I met her 3 months into dating Daniel, at a Sunday dinner where 12 people crowded around a table meant for 8. She looked me up and down, asked if I could cook, and when I admitted I couldn't, not really, not beyond scrambled eggs, she laughed in a way that wasn't unkind, but wasn't warm either. "Well," she said, "you'll learn or you won't." I decided I would learn. We got married 2 years later. I didn't take a job in the restaurant right away. I was working in marketing at the time. A steady, unremarkable job I didn't love but didn't hate either. I started helping out at Rosa's Kitchen on weekends, just bussing tables and occasionally covering the register when they were short-staffed. But I kept finding excuses to hang around the kitchen after my shift ended, watching the line cooks work, asking questions nobody had time to answer. Somewhere in that first year, something in me clicked. I loved the rhythm of it, the way 6 things happened at once and somehow all landed on the plate at the right moment. I loved that a sauce could take 4 hours and taste like patience itself. I asked the head cook, a soft-spoken man named Tomas, who'd been with the family for 20 years, if he'd teach me. He said the kitchen wasn't really Linda's kitchen and Daniel's kitchen, not entirely. He said it belonged to whoever showed up and did the work. I quit my marketing job 18 months later. Linda thought I was insane. "You had a real career," she told me, more than once, in a tone that made it clear she thought cooking wasn't one. But I kept showing up. Within 2 years, I was running the line 4 nights a week. Within 4, I was training every new hire who walked through that kitchen door, including 2 of Linda's own nephews, who lasted about 6 weeks each before deciding restaurant work wasn't for them. The fire happened in our 2nd year of marriage, on a Tuesday night in February, after closing. An electrical fault in the walk-in cooler sparked and smoldered for hours before anyone noticed the smoke. By the time the fire department got it under control, the kitchen was gutted. We lost 2 ovens, half the walk-in, and the small back office where Linda kept a locked metal box of recipe cards. Decades of handwritten notes from her mother, her grandmother, dishes going back to a village outside Naples that none of us had ever seen. Linda stood in the parking lot at 2 in the morning, watching the firefighters coil their hoses, and she didn't cry about the ovens or the walk-in. She cried about the box. 50 years, she kept saying. 50 years, gone in one night. The dish everyone was most afraid of losing was the sauce, the one that had anchored the menu since the restaurant opened, the one regulars ordered by name instead of by dish. Linda swore up and down that nobody could recreate it. She'd tried in the weeks after the fire, and it came out wrong every time. Too sweet, too thin, missing whatever quiet thing made it taste like someone's grandmother had made it. "Nobody remembers it exactly," she told a table of us one night, exhausted, sauce-stained, close to tears. "Nobody but me, and I can't get it right anymore." I didn't say anything that night. But I'd made that sauce probably 400 times by then, under Tomas's eye, adjusting a pinch of this and a pullback of that as he nodded or shook his head. I went home and, for 3 weeks straight, after closing shifts, I stood in my own kitchen testing batches from memory. I wrote down every adjustment on a yellow legal pad. More acid, longer simmer, less sugar, a pinch of something Tomas always added that Linda apparently never knew about. On the 4th attempt, I brought a jar to the restaurant before opening and set it in front of Linda without a word. She took a spoon, tasted it, and went completely still. Then she started to cry, right there at the prep table, in front of the whole morning crew. "That's it," she said. "That's exactly it. How did you—" "I've made it a lot of times," I told her. "I just paid attention." I remember driving home that day, feeling like something had shifted for good between us. I genuinely thought, that this was the moment Linda would finally see me as part of the family, not just the woman who married her son. For a while, it seemed like it had. Linda hugged me for the first time in 3 years of knowing her. She told Daniel, in front of me, that I'd saved the restaurant. For about 2 months, I felt like I'd earned something permanent. Then, the story started to change. It happened slowly enough that I almost didn't notice. A regular customer asked Linda what the secret was, and she said, "It's my mother's recipe from Naples." Not a lie, exactly. The original had been her mother's. But the version everyone was eating now was mine, built from memory and adjusted through trial and error. And that detail simply stopped coming up. A local food blogger did a write-up calling it Linda Moretti's century-old family sauce. Linda shared the post on the restaurant's page with 3 exclamation points. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't in this for credit. I was in it because I loved the work, loved the kitchen, loved watching a table's expression when they tasted something that good for the first time. And most days, that was true. But there were moments that stuck with me. There was the newspaper feature 2 years after the fire, complete with a photo of Linda standing over the exact pot I'd been stirring 20 minutes earlier, holding a wooden spoon like she'd used it every day for 40 years. There was the local morning show segment where Linda demonstrated the recipe on camera and got 2 of the steps wrong because she genuinely didn't remember them. Because she hadn't cooked it regularly in over a decade. I watched that clip in the back office with Tomas, and he just shook his head and said, "You should say something." I didn't. Daniel's answer whenever I brought it up at home was always some version of the same thing. "She's proud of the restaurant, that's all it is. It's not really about you." Or, "You know it's really your recipe, isn't that enough?" I wanted to tell him that it should be enough, and that it wasn't, and that there's a specific kind of tired that comes from doing the same invisible work for years while someone else takes the bow. There was one bad year, our 6th year of marriage, where it nearly broke us. I'd asked, gently, if my name could go on the menu somewhere, even just a small line, "Recipe developed by Emily Moretti." Linda said it would be confusing for customers, and that the family name is the family name. Daniel sided with her, or at least didn't side with me, which felt the same. I remember sitting in our car after that dinner, telling him I felt like I'd married into a family that used me and erased me in the same breath. He didn't have a good answer. Neither of us brought it up again for a long time. We just quietly stopped talking about it, the way couples do with the arguments that don't have an ending. Around that time, a friend of mine named Priya, who worked in food licensing for a much bigger restaurant group, came to visit and ended up in the kitchen with me one slow Tuesday afternoon. I told her the whole story, mostly as a joke, mostly to vent. She didn't laugh. "Do you have anything in writing?" she asked. "Notes, dates, anything showing you developed that recipe?" I told her I had an old legal pad somewhere with my test batches from after the fire. She told me, flatly, that I should get it notarized and filed properly. Not because I was planning to sue anybody, but because in her experience, family businesses eventually turn into fights about ownership, and the person who did the actual work is usually the last one anyone thinks to protect. "It's not about being petty," she said. "It's about having proof in case you ever need it." I felt a little strange doing it, like I was preparing for a fight I hoped would never happen. But I found the legal pad, copied it into a proper notebook with dates and ingredient ratios, and drove to a notary's office on my day off. I filed a formal recipe registration under my own name, with a disclaimer establishing that the current version of the recipe had been independently developed by me in the 2 years following the documented fire at Rose's kitchen. I never told Daniel. I never told Linda. I put the notebook in a drawer in our home office, and honestly, for the next several years, I mostly forgot about it. 2 years ago, everything changed again. A regional restaurant group approached Linda about franchising Rose's Kitchen. 12 locations across 3 states. A jarred version of the sauce sold in grocery stores. A cookbook deal. The works. Linda was ecstatic. She'd talked for years about the restaurant becoming more than just one location, and here it finally was. She called a family dinner to announce it. Daniel's father, Tony, who mostly stayed out of the day-to-day running of the restaurant, raised a glass. Daniel's sister flew in from out of state. It felt, for a moment, like a genuinely happy night. Then Linda looked at me across the table and said, "Emily, honey, you'll help train the new kitchens, won't you? You know it better than anyone." "Of course," I said. And I meant it. I was proud of that restaurant, whatever its politics. I just sat there, in that moment, wishing that just once, "You know it better than anyone," came with something more than an assumption that I'd keep doing the work quietly. A week later, a reporter from a regional food magazine came to interview Linda for a piece titled 3 Generations of Rose's Kitchen, a Family's Century-Old Secret. I wasn't in the room for the interview, but I read the finished article on my lunch break. Linda told the reporter the recipe had come straight from her mother, who'd brought it from a village outside Naples in the 1950s. There was no fire in that story, no gap, no me. I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot and read it twice. Then I went home that night and told Daniel exactly how it felt. 13 years of cooking that sauce, training every person who ever made it, catching every batch that started to go wrong, and reading, in print, that it belonged to a version of the family history that quietly erased me from it. Daniel sighed. He looked tired, the way he always looked when this subject came up. Does it really matter? It's good for the business. The reporter probably just wanted a simpler story. Can you just let her have this one? I told him sure. I smiled. And that night, lying awake next to him, I thought about the notebook sitting in the drawer of our home office. And for the first time in years, I didn't forget about it. Franchising a family recipe, it turns out, is not as simple as writing it on a menu. To license the Moretti family recipe to 12 new locations, and to put a version of it on grocery store shelves nationwide, the restaurant group's legal team needed a clean chain of ownership, clear proof of who created the recipe and when,
so no competitor or former employee could challenge the trademark down the line.
Linda assumed this would be a formality. In the first legal meeting, which I attended because I was, after all, the one training the new kitchens, the lead attorney asked whether there were any written records establishing the recipe's origin. Linda laughed and said, "It's family tradition, not paperwork. It's been handed down since the 50s. The attorney, a careful woman named Ms. Alvarez, asked whether the current version matched a documented family recipe or whether it had changed over the decades. Linda hesitated, just slightly, and said it was basically the same, with small tweaks over time. Daniel, sitting beside her, glanced at me. He knew about the fire, obviously. He'd lived through it. But I don't think it had occurred to him until that exact moment that small tweaks wasn't really an accurate description of what had happened. The entire recipe had been lost and rebuilt from scratch by someone else. He didn't say anything in that meeting. But that night, at home, he asked me, quietly, almost like he was afraid of the answer. "Do you actually remember how you figured it out again, after the fire?" I told him yes. I told him I had notes. The second legal meeting was the one that mattered. Ms. Alvarez came back with a list of requirements for the trademark filing, and one line stopped the room cold. Documented proof of the recipe's current formulation and its true date of origin, given that a fire 11 years earlier had destroyed the restaurant's original records. A fact that had come up in the restaurant's insurance file and couldn't simply be left out of a legal filing, however inconvenient it was for the story in the magazine. Linda went pale. She said there was nothing in writing, that after the fire she'd simply remembered it as best she could, which everyone in that room now understood wasn't quite true either. That's when Daniel, to his credit, finally said something. "Emily might have notes," he said. "She's the one who actually got the recipe right again, after the fire. I don't know if she wrote anything down." Every eye in the room turned to me. Linda's face did something complicated. Surprise, then something closer to dread, like she already knew where this was going. I said I'd check. I drove home that afternoon with my hands a little unsteady on the wheel, opened the drawer in our home office, and found the notebook exactly where I'd left it years earlier. Dated entries from 3 weeks of test batches. Ingredient ratios, adjustments. The exact date I'd brought that jar to Linda at the prep table. And clipped inside the front cover, a little yellowed by now, the notarized registration, filed under my name, establishing that I had independently developed the current version of the recipe, dated a full 2 years before Linda had ever mentioned the word franchise. I brought it back to the office the next morning. Linda was there, along with Tony, Daniel, and Miss Alvarez. I set the notebook on the table without a word, the same way I'd set that jar in front of Linda all those years ago at the prep table. Miss Alvarez went through it page by page, cross-referencing the dates against the county fire report already sitting in the restaurant's insurance file. The same fire that had destroyed Linda's original recipe box. She checked the notarization, checked the date, checked it twice. Then she looked up, first at Linda, then at the rest of the room and said, "According to this documentation, the recipe currently being used, and the one you're proposing to license to 12 locations and a national grocery chain, is not your mother's 1950s formula. It was independently recreated and authored by Emily." Linda's face went through about 4 emotions in the space of 10 seconds. Confusion first, then disbelief, like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was a joke. Then something that looked almost like betrayal, aimed straight at me. "You had this the whole time?" she said. 13 years, and you never said a word?" "I did say something," I told her. and I kept my voice level because I'd imagined this exact moment more times than I wanted to admit. Every time I trained a new cook, every time I caught a batch before it split, every time a reporter asked what the secret was and you answered for both of us, I said something every single day I stood in that kitchen. Nobody was listening because nobody needed to. Tony, who almost never weighed in on restaurant matters, said quietly, "She's right, Linda." Daniel didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the notebook, then at me, like he was replaying 13 years of dinners and interviews and magazine articles from a completely different angle, all at once, and not liking what he saw. We didn't blow up the franchise deal. That was never really what I wanted, whatever Linda assumed in that first panicked hour. What I asked for, once everyone had calmed down enough to actually talk, was simple. My name on the recipe registration, properly, in the legal filing, a credited line, recipe developed by Emily Moretti, on every jar and every new location's menu. And a royalty on the franchise licensing, the same percentage any outside chef would get for developing a restaurant's signature dish. Because that is, factually, what had happened. Linda fought it for about a week. She told Daniel it felt like I was making this about money and trying to take something away from the family. But her own lawyers, the same ones handling the franchise deal, quietly pointed out that fighting me on this publicly would mean explaining to 12 new franchisees, a national grocery chain, and eventually a reporter exactly why the century-old family recipe on the label was actually developed a little over a decade ago by the daughter-in-law nobody had bothered to credit. Put that way, sharing credit suddenly seemed like the easier option. The jars on the shelf today say, "Rosa's Original Sauce, recipe by Emily Moretti," in small print under the family name. Linda still tells customers it's a family tradition, and honestly, at this point, that part is true. Because I am family, whether or not it took a legal filing for that to be acknowledged out loud. Daniel apologized, eventually, for years of just let her have this one. I told him I understood why he'd said it. It's easier to keep the peace than to keep score. But that peace built on someone quietly disappearing isn't really peace at all. We're better now. Not perfect, but better and honest in a way we weren't before. Linda and I have found something that works. Most days. She still takes the photos for the press releases. I still run the kitchen. But now, when someone asks what the secret is, she tells the truth. The fire, the 3 weeks of testing, the jar I set in front of her at the prep table all those years ago. It took 13 years and a franchise deal for that story to get told correctly. But it did, eventually, get told. Sometimes you don't need to fight loudly for the credit you deserve. You just need to have quietly kept the one piece of paper that proves it was yours all along.